Hello and welcome to another episode of Primetime, more specifically to another mentor episode, where it's always my endeavor to be in conversation with somebody, with a professional who, despite all the odds and at great personal and professional risk, have been able to convert their passion, manifest their passion into a full fledged career. And I'm absolutely thrilled that I'm joined today by none other than Abhinandan Sekhri. And Abhinandan, among all the various hats that he's donned over the period of time, from being a director, producer, actor, what is of most significance to me and to us and to this episode is the fact that he's the co-founder of Newslaundry, perhaps the only ad-free news platform in this country, and has been doing some absolutely remarkable work in news reportage. And let's sort of learn more from him about that whole journey. So Abhinandan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Karthik. Although I haven't done any acting professionally, but yeah, the rest is true. The only acting I did do was uh, this play, which I don't know. It's a long story how I ended up doing that in Delhi, called Closer at the British High Commission. But yeah, that is the only acting I've done.
Great, Abhinandan. I want to start by taking you back a little bit and tell us a little bit about your growing up years and your childhood, please.
Well, I had a fantastic childhood. Actually, I grew up in Dehradun. My mother was a teacher at Welland Girls School, and my father was in the army, which he left by the time I was 8, 9 years. Well, no, I was 9 by the time when he quit the army and moved back. But till then, he used to be in the army, so he was posted to wherever he was. He was there most of the year. We used to go there for our summer holidays or winter holidays. But Dehradun was a very different town then than what it is now. I've gone back a few times. It was a classic small town. It was like a Malgudi days kind of town. Everybody knew everybody else. You walked everywhere. There were hardly any vehicles on the road. Like there was no fear. At the age of 6, I used to go buy the milk. There was a doodwala where they used to take out the dood and give it to you in your. People would make lines. I could go and buy kites on my own and then fly them. Uh, so it was great, and then I joined school at Welham Boys School, which was in Dehradun. So the school was there, home was there, everybody knew everybody. I mean, I remember my grandmother when she had gone on for a walk and she had a concussion and fell down at some petrol pump. It was the Rajpur Road petrol pump. She used to go for a walk across English Book Depot, and within 10 minutes there was someone in our house with her. They knew that she was, Colonel Sekhri's mother. So that's the kind of place it was back then. So and then from Wellham, then I went to Doon, which is where you are also. But of course, you joined when I had left. You're a young man. I'm much older on that, but yeah. So that is what my childhood was like. It was a little bit of studies, not too much. A lot of kite flying, a lot of cycling around there, doing lots of basketball, lots of catching um, caterpillars and keeping them in Hajmola bottles with holes and watching it turn into a pupa and then into a butterfly. That used to be the favorite pastime of a lot of kids. Uh, of course, some evil stuff also, like shooting chameleons and squirrels with an air gun, which when you look back, I don't know, our parents clearly thought it was okay to give a child an air gun and go around shooting stuff. I did that to a child. But yeah, catching tadpoles from the East Canal during monsoon in those little Rasna bottles and then watching them grow. It was fantastic. I had a great childhood.
You painted a very vivid picture, but what I'm also trying to essentially get at is I'm trying to get a sense of your interests or your hobbies while growing up, and what were some of your influences and how you eventually became attracted to or drawn towards the whole journalism thing.
Uh, I'd say that would be a slower evolution. I was very fond of reading, when I was very young. For two reasons. My mother, being an English teacher, our house was stacked with books. I mean, even right now, you know, most of these books are my mother's. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and when we moved to Delhi, I remember my mother had to give away some 3,000 books because the apartment could not accommodate, because Dehradun little, it was homes with gardens and bungalows. It was big.
Sure.
Delhi has small apartments. That's where we moved. So I was very fond of reading. I And because it was a small town, and in the holidays, everyone would go home, and my home was also Dehradun, or the cantonment wherever my father was posted, which was either Siliguri, Bhopal, Mathura, the EME posting. You ended up spending a lot of time by yourself, so therefore you just end up reading a lot. Like no one had to tell me to read.
Sure. Got it.
There was no internet. There was no TV. So you just didn't had many choices. If you weren't flying kites or catching caterpillars and shooting squirrels, you were reading. And then in college is when I really got an interest in following current affairs and politics. Actually, I had started that even in Dehradun. When VCRs came, we had a VCR, and this I started watching Newstrack. So I was like blown away by Newstrack, and I mean when I actually came to Delhi and met Madhu Trehan, because I had my sister's friend who worked there, and I was like starstruck. It was like meeting Amitabh Bachchan. So when I got an opportunity while I was in my third year college to work as a researcher at Newstrack, it was just because her name's Sabrina Dhawan. She's a professor at New York NYU. She was working at Newstrack as a reporter, and she was a very good friend of my sister's, who's 6 years older than me. So she said, you clearly don't go to college very much. You're not spending a lot of time in class, and you are interested in reading and politics. Why don't you come and, just see what it's like? You might enjoy it. So I joined Newstrack as a researcher, and I loved it. And then I mean, I took the MBA exam because that is what everybody did after graduating back then. I did economics honors, so you weren't sure. I mean, I'm talking 90, 94, 95 when we had kind of decided what we're going to do. So everyone said, okay, after this, we're going to take I think it was called the CAT exam, which basically for all the MBA schools, it was like one
Correct.
exam. So I was like, everyone has to take, even I'll take because I've done eco honors. That is what. But I took the exam, but it was clear that I wouldn't leave. So I kind of, from a research, I became a reporter. Then I stayed at Newstrack for about 4 years. Aaj Tak was born. Newstrack died. Newstrack became redundant, I guess. A new news format started. The new news format didn't excite me that much. So my friend, who was my colleague back then, Prashant, who was also at Newstrack, he and I both quit, and we started a small company, which was not much of a company. There were just two of us, and we did a documentary film, which luckily went on to do very well. It won 2 international awards, and then we just stuck on, and we grew from 2 people to about 45, 50 people, and then we started small screen. Small screen became a big, healthy company. Then we started News Laundry. I was in touch with Madhu, and Rupak, meanwhile, had joined us. He was a friend from my childhood. So then, yeah, that's how it kind of started like that.
Well, you've mentioned a lot of things very quickly, so I might backtrack a little bit. You said when you joined us, so would it be fair to say that you sort of stumbled into journalism then?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
It,
and
it was
when you did join Newstrack, and as a researcher, you said you loved it. What did you love about it?
I loved. A- I liked the exercise of like the shoot, the edit, the research. Even when I was very young, even when I was like in class 9 and 10, I would read the newspaper. It wasn't normal for it wasn't like every 14-year-old child would read the newspaper.
Sure.
Now I don't know why. I mean, I guess I was just interested. I used to read the paper. So when I was in Dehradun and Doon Club, I used to rent out the VHS tape of Newstrack. I remember I watched the Chandraswamy tape. Newstrack had done a story on Chandraswamy, and I was blown away. And they used to do it really well. And then, of course, they had done a story on Pooja Bedi. She had just done the Kama Sutra ad, which was like for the 80s, it was like, whoa, how can you make an ad like that? She's
Right.
making in a shower, and Pooja Bedi was like, so Newstrack used to do those kind of stories. They used to do hardcore. Then they had done, uh, that story on the Mandal Commission. So it was just very compelling to watch. So, but there was no way I had ever thought of it as a career, or I mean, I didn't have any journalists around me. It was not something I could even fathom that this is something one can do. Um, so I had no intention of like pursuing it. That just was because I was in Delhi, and Sabrina said that why is he wasting time, hanging out with the wrong kind of people of Delhi University. So, so that's how. And then when I joined, it was interesting because, the interviews, I touch wood, I had the confidence back then. So even when I remember I was very young, and that time Pranab Mukherjee, of course, wasn't such a big politician yet. I mean, he had his time in the sun. This was Congress under Sitaram Kesari. It wasn't much of a. Uh, I remember I had been sent to interview Sushma Swaraj. I had been sent to interview Pranab Mukherjee. I interviewed the Home Minister during UPA. What's his name? The gentleman from Maharashtra. I'm getting old. Uh, so I interviewed quite a few people, and I mean, it was clear to me that others thought it was good that I could do it at the age of 21. I could do these interviews and come back. Uh, I enjoyed it. And I mean, I was earning money. I mean, I had never earned money in my life. So I was like, whoa. So of course, a big part of it was that I don't know, go back to being a student and not having any money.
Right.
So I was like, okay, I'll just work, and I just continued.
I saw. I, I don't think I can say recently, but I think perhaps in the past 4 or 5 years, I remember watching on the news. You were a panelist on some traditional TV news channel, and there was a very, very senior politician who kind of, took very poorly to your line of questioning. Uh, um, and so I just want to relate that to you being a young 20, 21-year-old upstart interviewing people like Sushma Swaraj, etc. Were there challenges there? Did these people take you seriously? Didn't they seem at any point offended कि ये कौन आ गया हमें interview करने हम क्यों करें?
No, I mean, I was, they were all very nice. Just this, this is bugging me. What's his name? It's how can I not remember? I mean, the
Home
only one,
Minister.
the Home Minister. One second. Yeah, who changed his shoes and his suit in one day when there was a bomb blast in in 3 days? One second. What's I'm just blanking out. Shivraj Patil.
Right. Okay.
So this is Shivraj Patil. So of course he wasn't Home Minister then, but that time he was, I think, in Maharashtra, in Bombay. He was had a press conference for something. Uh, he wasn't. I remember him making fun of me. I'll never forget because I asked him a question. He was trashing Bal Thackeray. I mean, it's not like I had any affection or fondness for Bal Thackeray, but he was saying something which just a few days before that, the Congress had done some Azad Maidan, they had done some protest. I was like, you guys did exactly the same thing. So he said, the reason we did it was very different. You don't know, you're very young, ha ha ha. And everyone started laughing. So it was like, but otherwise they were all, no, they were quite nice to me. I mean, I thought no one was, the one person who actually ripped into me was Vidhu Vinod Chopra. He had just,
Mm-hmm.
come up with a film called Kareeb,
Okay.
launching a young girl called Neha, and it was Bobby Deol. This was when Bobby Deol was still considered a big star
Uh-huh.
because his debut was huge. And in Manesar near Delhi, they had the release of their music. And I was interviewing him. I said that uh, um, I said something like, considering 1942, a love story, which was his film that had just been released before that, was a flop or didn't do very well. And yet Parinda was this cult film which had this, cult following. So he took great offense. He said, "What do you know about?" He says, "Do you know it had the highest? returns, I don't know, with some Glasgow or somewhere. Says, तुम बच्चे हो, तुम्हें कुछ पता नहीं है, ऐसे ही आ जाते हो बिना research किए यार. It was, I think at that time I was, I think, 22 or 23. I don't remember. It was, but yeah, it was. I didn't feel intimidated. Now when I look back, I'm like, I wouldn't send someone, to do an interview unless I have really trained them. But back then things were different. Yeah, you were thrown into the deep end and expected to swim. I remember going to office on Monday and coming back home on Thursday.
Wow.
Because elections weren't EVM. It was, ballot round one of counting round two. So, use a Newstrack. The tape had to be even to Doordarshan. Sometimes you had to get it ready. So you kind of today, if you expect someone to do that, someone will put a post on Twitter. This is exploitative. There are horrible working conditions. How can I? I thought it was great. I enjoyed every minute of it. It was fun. And there weren't so many channels. I mean, if you're working in Newstrack, you were something, and a Newstrack camera meant something.
Correct. Yeah.
So if you said, "Hi, I'm Abhinandan from Newstrack," even if you look like a kid, they said, "Okay, he's from Newstrack," so they took you seriously. The brand was big. We just rode on the brand.
Right. Okay. Tell us now. I want to shift, a little bit and talk more in detail about News Laundry specifically, and tell us about the genesis of News Laundry a little bit in detail.
News Laundry was a passion project to begin with. It wasn't really envisaged as this, this pursuit. It was just something that Madhu, Prashant, Rupak and I were discussing, and even after I quit Newstrack, and Madhu had moved on from Newstrack before I quit. Once Aaj Tak started, it became the main stay of TV Today network. I used to bump into her in Delhi now and then, and we often used to say that "Dekho news ka kya haal ho gaya." Although news had not, the Arnabification of news hadn't happened.
Yes.
But we tend to forget, even before Arnab made news this toxic, horrible thing, it had become this frivolous soundbite collection exercise. Because, Newstrack were long form. It was like anything from 4 minutes to like 40 minutes a story could be. It was like a mini documentary film. There was like, imagine I was hired as a researcher. I'm not sure there is any such position in, I know News Laundry we have for researchers, but in other channels, I don't know if there's anything called a researcher who does the research and gives it to you. Of course, at that time there was no internet, so you needed a researcher. Now you have Google, I guess.
Right.
Because researchers used to go to the library, photocopy. Like, I remember the first story I had been sent to do research and was on the MQM, the Muttahida Qawmi movement, Altaf Hussain.
Right.
So now I'll just, Google MQM Altaf Hussain. Back then there was no such facility.
Sure, of course. Yeah.
So there was this Indian library which had all the newspapers and magazines of the last like 40 years. So you went and actually looked, copied, then you came back with a file with photocopies of articles about Altaf Hussain. You read up, then your reporter took the file and he or she saw it. Then they said, "Okay, I want more detail on this." Then you again went to the library and photocopied whatever newspaper cuttings and stuff. So, and that's how you did your research. So therefore, there was a thoroughness. Eventually, when a reporter ended up doing a story, that reporter had read up so much about that, even by default, he just knew so much about the subject.
Right.
Now you have to do a 90-second story. And I remember when the transition happened from even Newstrack to Aaj Tak. Aaj Tak, before it became a channel, was a bulletin. We were told your stories have to be 90 seconds. So those of us who worked at Newstrack were blown away. What does it mean? How can you tell a story in 90 seconds? You have to have like 3-4 minutes at least, if not 10-11 minutes.
Sure.
90-second story. 1.5 minutes is like, I can't tell a story, but you could. You said today Advani came and met so and Vajpayee did this, and Sitaram Kesri and Sonia Gandhi had a fight. You get one bite. You do this. You do Abhinandan Sekhri, Aaj Tak. End of story.
Right.
So when channels happened, and then it had become this 24-hour beast, and that 24-hour beast had to be fed all the time. Then all the sprints and stuff, all that stuff had happened, and uh, you just saw a lot of drama and hysteria on air. Uh, so we used to often speak about we should do a show where we satirize news channels, because news
Hmm.
channels have got on top of the pyramid. They critique politicians, industrialists, bureaucrats, cricketers, everything. But who critiques them? And there are
Sure.
enough and there are enough reasons to critique them, because there's enough wrong there as well. So it started off with, we'll do a show, because nobody had the stature that Madhu Trehan did. Like, she was the pioneer of the electronic media transition in India. I mean, Newstrack was the biggest thing there was, since times of India during R.K. Lakshman days. So, so from one show, but no channel wanted to put it on air. So
Certainly.
we said, let's just put it online. And that's, we started the show that she did called Clothesline. Then we did a show called Can You Take It, where she'd interview people. And then from a show, we said, let's just do a lot of stuff which is media critique. And then within the first year, we got noticed because no one was doing stuff like this. And then we said, okay, let's actually pursue this seriously. Because earlier, because Small Screen had an office, we had extra cameramen, editors, space. It wasn't that much of a separate task to do it, because we had very successful shows on air. Small Screen, we had Highway on a Place, Twist of Taste,
Sure.
Bhatia. We had done Roti Rasta India. We later we went on to do OMG India much later. But Small Screen had a show on every channel. We had a show on Discovery Travel and Living, Nat Geo, NDTV Good Times, Enadu TV, Doordarshan, Food. Like, name a channel, we had a show on it. So running a portal wasn't a significant additional cost. But then later we said, okay, if this is something that we need to make grow and do seriously, uh, we have to look at it as a full-time pursuit and not just a passion project on the side. So that's when we said, okay, let's do this. And by that time, and here I'm talking, like, by 2013, the media had just completely gone by 2010 11, it had just completely gone to the dogs. I mean, the Arnabification had started. It
Right.
had become a circus. And so then, yeah, we just said,
Wonderful.
that's
Okay. I want to also ask you a couple of really basic, silly type of questions, more for the benefit really of the young audience whom I hope watches this particular interview. Um, you've not studied journalism. Do you find that to be, or did you at any point, or do you still find that to be a disadvantage? Or would it have been an advantage?
No, I think my view on this, I don't want any children to go by my advice, go by what your parents and your teachers tell you. But I personally don't think journalism can be taught.
Why?
Because I don't think journalism is a separate skill like engineering or medicine or software programming is. Journalism is telling stories accurately, honestly. Journalism is more about your intent than about your skill. You are telling stories. It's less technical than filmmaking. And while there are excellent film schools and all that, but are the finest filmmakers necessarily trained? Have they gone to film school? You
Sure.
know,
No, certainly
uh,
not.
our Anurag Kashyap used to run a cassette shop. Quentin Tarantino, the same, who I think are the two most gifted filmmakers of our generation. Um, it's basically telling a story, telling it right. What you need is a good mentor, which I luckily had. I had people like Sabrina, Alpana Kishore, Madhu Trehan. Um, but I I I studied economics honors, and I think that's a huge advantage, because in economics honors we had, over 3 years. Of course, now I believe they have a trimester system, and but in our time, it was first year, second year, third year. I'm talking about undergrad. First you had 4 papers, second you had 5 papers, third you had 4 papers. You had what was called national income accounting, which is GDP, what we call today. You had economic history of India, you had economic system. So you studied, even if you didn't go to class, you still had to pass your exam. So you had to read
Okay.
up. You had writings of what is Marxism, what is socialism, what is communism, what is capitalism. Uh, and today I see reporters, they use words like Marxism, communism, and socialism interchangeably. They're three completely different things. I'm not sure journalism school would have taught me that. Economics
Hmm.
also taught me that. Like some of the best journalists who I have worked with are lawyers. They're trained lawyers. They didn't practice law, but they studied law and then said, okay, let's do journalism. I'm sure they're
Right.
great. But I'm not sure you need to spend 3 or 4 years studying it. I think you can learn that in 4 months. If you want to spend 4 years, study English literature, because there's so much you learn about the history of whatever books you're studying. There is a certain sociological aspect. In fact,
Sure.
even in economics, this Piketty, when he's written Capital, he's given examples of books like Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice type, that in the
Right.
novel written in the 1700s, they were looking for an eligible bachelor who had a estate of whatever 100,000 pounds or 1,000 pounds. So therefore,
Right.
1,000 pounds back then meant this. I mean, there's an
Right.
economic angle to studying that as well. So
Okay. So then it brings me to the question, and again, especially for youngsters, who should get into journalism and why? Who should get into journalism?
I think anyone who is passionate about telling stories, who likes research, who's interested in the craft um, of actually scrutinizing, understanding the world around us, and telling that story to others who don't have the time to scrutinize and research it. So I think journalism is more an exercise in passion than it is an exercise in a career. And if you can make your passion your career, I mean, that's fantastic. But if that is
Okay.
not,
Does one have to be, or should one be political to be a journalist?
no, in fact, I think if you're not political, it's a bigger advantage, because then your stories are less colored by prejudice. Uh, I mean, I don't report anymore. I don't call myself a journalist. I was a journalist. Now I'm an entrepreneur. I'm running. I have a management role. I'm a CEO. I conduct the odd interview and I write the odd opinion piece, but I don't do any ground reporting. When I did do ground reporting, I was very young, so I didn't really have a very firm view of how things should be.
Hmm.
Uh, I remember I had gone to cover this protest of Adivasis, that was um, Shantam Seth, that's Vikram Seth's brother. He was a part of that, and I remember, I think um, there was another very well-known activist of that time who was part of it. And I had a very simplistic view of things back then. I was 20, 21. I was like, why are they protesting, taking away their land? Like, if their land isn't taken away and dam is not made, then how are we going to power all the buildings and all? So he said, okay, then she said, but why are you taking away their land to power your building? Take away your land. I had never thought of that. Like, who decides whose land is taken away? You see, for
Sure.
me, it was a given that if a dam has to be made, some land has to be taken away, and it should be of these poor tribals. Why should it be mine? Uh, no, but I didn't sit there and start arguing with him. That no, I was like, okay, that's delightfully simple in its logic. Uh, and I didn't completely agree with him. I didn't completely, but I was not dogmatic in my view. So I could do a report based on what I was getting, you see, and I could put a story together. Uh, so I mean, the only being political or having a political interest or knowledge is an asset and a liability both. But I think if you are fairly honest in how you kind of reflect on your own biases, your own prejudices, then you can do a good job, even if you are very political. But if you're dogmatic, then maybe it's not the space for you. Yeah.
Yeah, which is sort of a good segue to my last question, because you talked about having a thing for telling stories and scrutinizing situations and putting them out there. But who's to say that person has this unimpeachable journalistic integrity? So then what happens?
Yes, then what happens is what you see happening around us in legacy media. That's what happens. But that's also because the model is broken. You see, I will not blame all the journalists who are doing shit work because they want to do shit work.
If I can just interrupt you, the reason I'm asking this is that I'm teaching mostly, middle schoolers and high schoolers in my teaching work. And I come across so many kids who are now, because of the TVification and the way the media and the news business has become, they're almost glamour struck. So I shudder to think, and I fear sometimes their motivations and reasons behind wanting to become journalists.
Karthik, that had actually started in the mid 2000s to late 2000s. I know many people who became journalists to become anchors,
Right.
and many of them made it also. And funny enough, some of them became good journalists eventually, although they didn't join for the right reasons. But many didn't. And that has become worse. You just want to be on air and you want to have that power of
Correct.
even when I was, in Newstrack, I was a 21 years old and I used to go for any shadi, uncle auntie's house. They'd say, "तो क्या हो रहा है देश में? किसकी सरकार बन रही है?" Because they were, there was an election, I think 95, then in 97, 97 and 99, they were like, until when the IK Gujral government fell over, they were God, I forget. There was just, in like 5 years, I had covered 3 general elections, which you had to normally take 15 years to cover. But I think that's an inevitable, downside of every profession. Many people get into the professions for the wrong reasons, and that's true for every profession. But as long as a certain significant chunk are getting in there for the right reasons, the craft will prevail. Just like cinema, just like law, not all lawyers are there for justice.
Finally, what does one have to do as a youngster to get a job or an internship at News Laundry?
Mail contact@newslaundry.com. We take interns regularly. But I must warn whoever is watching, your students, etc., that if you're not a hard worker, and if you're not, I mean, if you think it's going to be this little time pass thing, you won't last. You'll be asked to discontinue internship by the second week. In the first week, we decide who can hack it and who cannot. And then they stay for a month, and then there's a paid internship second month on.
All right, great. So it's been lovely chatting. You've given us a lot of food for thought, some insights into your own life, some insights into News Laundry, and a lot of food for thought for young people who might be considering getting into journalism. Thank you for taking the time. It's been lovely chatting, and I will hopefully see you soon.
I hope so, Karthik. Take care. Good luck with your teaching, and see you soon, man.